Welcome to the Global News Podcast from the BBC. Hello, I'm Oliver Conway, and today we're joined by our Europe correspondent Sarah Rainsford to discuss the sudden rush of migrants from Morocco into the Spanish territory of Ceuta. And Sarah, first tell us about Ceuta, or Ceuta as it's also called, and why over the years it has been a migrant hotspot.
It's a part of Spain which is in North Africa, and it is relatively easy to reach for migrants who are trying to get to Europe. So it's a small, tiny sort of pinprick really on the whole landmass of Africa, but it borders Morocco directly, and the border between Morocco and Ceuta is a fence essentially which goes out a little way into the sea. So when people try to reach this sliver of European territory in Africa, then they usually do that by swimming, generally several kilometres from further along the coast in Morocco, but then they have to go around that fence to make it to the beach in Ceuta. It's complicated, but it is far less complicated, of course, than spending 5-6 days at sea trying to go from the coast of West Africa, for example, to the Canary Islands and other Spanish territory.
Yeah, so tell us about this sudden rush of tens of thousands of people.
Yeah, we now think, according to the Interior Ministry, the Spanish Interior Ministry, it's around about 50,000 people who initially made it across the border and into Ceuta. Now that is unprecedented. It has never happened before. The only previous big surge in arrivals was around about 8,000 people back in 2021. Now this time the surge was really quite extraordinary because some people were able simply to scramble onto the rocks and walk around the edge of the border fence. That was at the beginning. A bit later it seemed that most people had to swim, so they had to get out to sea and then around the fence and landing then on the beaches of Ceuta. And then the scenes there were again quite something to see, because there were huge piles of inflatable rings, swimming aids, flippers that people have been using, wetsuits that people have ripped off when they got there, all abandoned on the beach, and euphoric scenes as the people who had made it to Ceuta, to this Spanish territory, were celebrating and shouting Viva España, and then making victory signs towards journalist cameras there.
But we do know that in this rush, a number of people did die.
Yeah, several dozen people lost their lives. Most of them, we understand, drowned. Some people in the crush and the chaos initially as people rushed towards the border. Now, I think the big question at this point in all of this is how it came to happen. Why were so many people amassing in that area and kind of given a signal, it seems, to head towards the border? Now, the Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sánchez, he is blaming human traffickers. He's saying that they have deceived young people primarily into crossing and to luring them essentially to that crossing point. But it is clear that there was very little resistance, if any, from the images that we've seen and that other people have studied, resistance or prevention by the Moroccan border guards. So it's quite, I think, a big question at this point, how much the Moroccan border guards appeared to simply melt away, and how come so many people were able to reach that border crossing and then get past it with relative ease.
Yeah, what do we know about the people who crossed? Because in the past, you've seen migrants from other parts of Africa go to Morocco to try to get into Ceuta or Melilla. But I read a lot of reports that many of these were actual Moroccans.
Yeah, it does appear to be the case. And I think it's also really important to say that the Spanish Interior Minister is saying that, in fact, half of those people, so around about 25,000 of the people who made that crossing, have headed back in the other direction already. They've gone back to Morocco. I've seen some interviews with young Moroccan men saying that they came when there was nothing in Ceuta for them, no food, nowhere to sleep, and that there was no point in hanging around. And they simply turned around and went back through a hole in the fence or swam around the border crossing and back to Morocco. So that is quite extraordinary and quite unique, I think, to understand why those people thought that there would be something better for them on the other side in the first place. But there are other people coming from other areas other regions of Africa. And I think it's important as well to put this in the context of the much tighter controls that there have been recently off the coast of West Africa to prevent migrants from making the crossing towards the Canary Islands, for example, Spanish territory, out in that direction. So that has, in some senses, squeezed people north, and it is one reason why some migrants from sub-Saharan Africa will be trying to get to Europe through Ceuta, through Melilla, through those Spanish autonomous cities in the north of Africa.
And what is happening to the people who haven't gone back to Morocco, those who are still in Ceuta?
Well, all the political statements have been really strong. So the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has headed straight to Ceuta. From handling the wildfires in Spain, he's now handling this migrant crisis in this Spanish exclave. Now he is there saying, look, these people will be deported. They will be sent back to Morocco. It's important at this point to note as well that although Spain is EU territory and Morocco is not, of course, and that normally if somebody applies for asylum or the right to remain in the EU, that would have to be examined and considered on human rights grounds. Between Morocco and Spain, there is an arrangement that essentially allows Spain to push people back to Morocco, and Morocco is supposed to take them. It is, I think, on the edge of migration legality, let's say, but it's something that happens. And so the Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez is saying that these people will be pushed back, essentially deported to Morocco. But I think that's a lot easier said than done. There are at least 20,000, 25,000 people currently in Ceuta. They have nowhere to go, they have nowhere to stay. Lots of people are sleeping in the streets. I think the conditions are difficult. Perhaps some of them will just go back. But otherwise, there is quite a big humanitarian issue for the Spanish government to contend with. And you would expect at some point for at least some of those people to be transferred to the mainland of Spain. That is what's happened in the past. Although in the last crisis, the vast majority of the people who came across eventually were deported back to Morocco, and that happened very quickly. So I think the Spanish want this to happen as quickly as possible, because the longer it goes on, the harder it is for them to handle.
Yeah, it's also causing problems for them with Italy, which is threatening to suspend its free border movement between Spain and Italy.
It is, but I think there's a lot of politics at work in those words. So very, very quickly, as soon as those images began to spread over social media of primarily young men rushing across a border into EU territory, then very, very quickly, Italy's hard right Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni went to social media and she talked about the security risk to Europe. She talked about the shocking images, and she said that Italy would consider suspending its Schengen agreement with Spain, so that by which people can come from Spain to Italy with no impediment, no checks. Now, there is no border between Italy and Spain. The only way that anyone could come here would be by flying, and it's pretty unlikely, let's say impossible, that undocumented migrants are about to board a plane from Spain to Italy. So I think this is primarily politics. It's Meloni, who's facing an election next year, losing votes to an even harder right politician and trying to appeal to that electorate above all. But migration is her issue. She has a hard line on it, and she's reiterating that at the moment.
And what are broader relations like between Spain and Morocco at the moment? Because sometimes in the past we've seen these mass migrant events when there have been tensions between the two nations.
Exactly. And to be honest, the thing that sprung straight to my mind was Belarus and Poland, a period in which Belarus was accused of weaponizing migration by allowing migrants across the border into Poland at a period of tension in that relationship. And at this, looking at the Spanish situation with Morocco, there are some echoes of that here, certainly from the descriptions that we're hearing from on the ground, and certainly if we look back to what happened in 2021, when it was quite clear that the Moroccan authorities basically stepped back and allowed people to cross the border. The Spanish Prime Minister has been very clear to play that down and to say that Morocco is an ally, a close ally, and that they are cooperating, because he, quite frankly, wants to be able to send people back to Morocco. So that's his public line. But the relationship is complicated. It's all about the Western Sahara region. It's all about sovereignty there, who recognises who as the rightful owner, if you like, of that territory, and the relationship between Spain, Morocco and Spain and Algeria, the other country in the mix there. So there is a complicated diplomatic relationship in the background, and it's something that people are pointing to as they try to explain what might have happened in this massive surge of people rushing for the border.
Sarah, thank you. Sarah Rainsford, our Southern Europe correspondent, talking to us from Rome. If you'd like to hear more from the Global News podcast, click the link below. But for now, thanks for watching.